Hi, I'm Kevin Freeman for York History Group. Today is October 15th, 2023, and I am with James Kences here at the Old Burying Ground in York Village, Maine. Before we get started, I would like to thank York History Group members for all of the significant contributions that you have made over the last few years, and the group is just beyond our wildest dreams. It has grown into a community where that it extends beyond history, and many friendships have been made, and my acquaintance with James here has been enhanced, no doubt, because of York History Group. So I want to thank all the members, and I also especially want to thank the moderators, and I want to thank Kevin McKinney and Elaine Wood, my two co-administrators. Working with them is like working with a dream team. They're just amazing to work with, and I really have a huge appreciation for you both, so thank you. Okay, so James and I are here today because James has done so much research, and one of his high points in his career probably has been, and James can correct me in a minute here if he needs to, but has been on a very fine point of the Salem witch trials and how that they were affected by the town of York, Maine. And James wants to make a clarification on that for us and for the history group so that we understand this as we sort of move forward with our knowledge of the Salem witch trials. Welcome, James.
Okay, sure.
So James wrote an academic paper which was published in 1984.
Right.
And in that paper, he elucidates the fact that there were several people from York that really helped to facilitate the witch trials that had a close tie to York, Maine. So James, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'll show you something. All right. This is critical because, all right, what happened with me in the 1970s? I've been working on something over the past few days. I called it What the Witchcraft Means to Me, right? And I've been working on it at the library for the past few days. So it starts back in 1970. I buy a copy of Chadwick Hanson's book on the Salem witch trials at the school store when I'm in 7th grade. Now, I looked at the book. I mean, I didn't read it cover to cover. I looked at the book, and it was probably one of my first exposures to some of the details of the witchcraft I'd never heard before. The funny thing is, and I put this in what I've been working at the library. At the time, I was very interested in King Philip's War. I never made the connection at the time that I was reading Chadwick Hanson's book, and I want that to be very clear. Then in 1975, I was in a field trip with my high school class, and we were watching The Crucible one afternoon, and as I'm watching The Crucible from the audience, a thought came to me. You know, maybe the Indian War has something to do with what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
Sitting in the audience going, maybe the Indian War has something to do with this. You know, by that time I'd studied King Philip's War intensively since I was about 7 or 8 years of age, so I really knew King Philip's War really well.
Yeah.
So the thing was, after that moment in 1975, with this in the back of my mind, every time I'd look at a map of Essex County, the puzzle occurred to me that the witchcraft accusations tended to move northward toward the frontier. So they moved from the Salem area, Salem Village area, northward into Andover, Billerica, towns that were directly in the frontier area of the Indian War period. And that to me intrigued me. The second thing, and that would turn up in 1977, but it's very important to point this out now, is that it's military families that are often involved in witchcraft. It's not just ordinary groups of people that are the accusers and on this other side. So that will be pointed out by 1977. So this book, it's the spring of 1977. I'm in the first year at UMass Amherst. You know, I'm looking at this book one morning, I believe it's a Saturday morning, and I open this book to the page, you know, as I'm casually looking through it, and it says, York is attacked in the winter of 1692. He gives the new style date, February 5th. This is Francis Parkman's book. He gives a new style date, February 5th. However, the old style date would have been January 25th, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what I was looking for. I had been looking for a trigger. I assumed that the witchcraft required a trigger to be set off.
Yeah.
And so I had the trigger finally. I ran to the bookshelves that I had the other books. I said, is Parkman telling the truth about all this? And he was. He basically was. York was attacked on January 25th, and that's about the time that the affliction started in Salem Village. So the afflicted girls start showing their symptoms in January 1692. I needed something that happened in January 1692.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I got really excited about it. But how do I connect the two, right? For months afterwards, I struggled to find a way to do it. Looking at everything from children impacted by Blitz bombing in England to everything, to find how could these individuals be affected by the war events to act the way they did. Couldn't get an answer. Then I read Boyer and Isambard over the course of the early summer of 1977. Amazing. They don't even mention the war. The war's not even in the book, as if there's no war going on.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And you see, I read the book going, oh my God, maybe these guys have already figured this out. See, you have to understand something. I have been working on theories for years before this, but oftentimes what would happen is I assumed I had an original theory, and then I'd find an article that basically said the very same thing that I had said, right?
Yeah.
Boyer and Isambard had figured this out, and it's destroyed another plan for me to have a theory. Well, they hadn't. They hadn't figured it out.
Yeah.
And I got a couple of leads from them that started me off, because they were saying some things that were really intriguing. So they were saying, for example, that Salem Village and Salem Town were in this independence effort, of this struggle where Salem Village sought to be independent of Salem Town. And then I looked at the leaders of the Salem independence movement. They were all military officers. They all held rank in the militia. The Putnam family, the leaders of the Salem Village movement for independence, all held militia rank. So I said to myself, maybe Salem Village's, the churches emphasized in their book, maybe the Salem Village militia is equally involved with this independence effort from Salem Town. So gradually, over the course of the summer, I began to build on something. And it was so slow and so frustrating, because I went up to the Massachusetts Archives. Massachusetts Archives was located in the State House at that time, in the basement area, and it was a small room. All of this has to be understood in the era before the internet. You had to go to all these sources to find these places, right?
Yeah, sure.
And you had to go through all of this early stuff in order to find what you were looking for. And you see, the thing is, I didn't drive.
Yeah.
So I had the added frustration of trying to get around to these places, and I didn't drive.
Yeah.
So it was agonizing. And I showed you that notebook.
Yeah.
That notebook is filled with page after page after page after page of me trying to begin an article. And I couldn't. I couldn't get further than a few paragraphs in that notebook.
So you had a few things that made you think that you were on the right track.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you weren't deterred at that point. And then, so what was the big revelation that came along that made you feel like this
The
is
big
it?
revelation, I was up at UMass Amherst in the library one late morning, going through the York deeds, because they had the volumes of York deeds there. And I saw the name Godfrey Sheldon in the volume. And that's the Godfrey Sheldon of Susanna Sheldon, the afflicted girl.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they lived in, the area to the north here, those settlements that were abandoned.
Yeah.
And they came down to Salem Village. And I said, I've got an afflicted girl who was from Maine.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, at the time, I encountered Libby Noyes and Davis, the genealogical dictionary of Maine and New Hampshire.
Yeah.
But the problem was I didn't know how reliable it was as a source. Part of the problem I faced at that time was there was nobody telling me that's a reliable source, because I was afraid to use it as a source of information if it wasn't reliable.
Yeah, sure.
So I had to use only those sources that I could really trust.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't include Mercy Lewis so much. I included Susanna Sheldon, because I knew from the source that she was actually, one of these afflicted girls.
Yeah.
So to think of the afflicted girls being from Maine, everything changed. Everything changed, because it actually began the process of explaining why these afflicted girls were behaving the way they did.
Yes.
York is attacked. So I guess the way to put it is it's a kind of PTSD explanation of the 1984 article. The landscape of Salem Village, the landscape of Essex County,
Yeah.
had been impacted by the Indian Wars since the 1670s, and the 1690s just revived all of that. And those girls in Salem Village responded to the York attack with the memories of what they knew up in Maine.
So what was the date of the accusation from the girls?
Well, so the girls begin to show afflictions in January, right? By
And that's the date of the rape?
yeah, what happens when authors, historians, try to figure when the afflictions began?
Yeah.
They use actually what Tituba says. Tituba in her confession says something like, they positioned around January 15th. Now Tituba's confessions are not something to be regarded. I mean, she's talking about, all kinds of bizarre things.
Yeah.
Why can't she be equally bizarre when she says that it's that point in January?
Yeah.
When Paris and others talk about it, they say some weeks before,
Yeah.
that. So William Griggs is a physician. The girls are showing all these symptoms. William Griggs comes and he basically is the one who says, this is by an evil hand. Well, what I've learned in the years I've been doing research, William Griggs is matrimonially allied through the Haskell marriage to the Giddings family and to Alcock in York. So somebody already beginning the witchcraft
Yeah.
is somebody tied who here, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, he says the girls are under an evil hand. And that begins this process where they're assuming that the afflictions are caused by witch possession.
Yeah.
So by late February of 1692, Corwin and Haythorne, the two magistrates, come and they legitimize the first arrests or first persons accused, Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. Those are the three witches.
Yeah.
So the witchcraft happened sort of like this, very slow.
Yeah.
The first three accused. You move into March, you get Martha Cora, you get Rebecca Nurse. Then you move into April. Something happens in April. Then you start moving into two people that are very controversial. You move into John Proctor, the first man who's accused of being a witch, and Sarah Cloyce, who's married to Peter Cloyce, who migrated to the Salem area from Wells in the probably late 1670s, early 1680s, a refugee from the King Philip's War. So the interesting thing about Peter or John Proctor's being charged, that's in early April. That's about April 11th that he's formally charged. Soon as that happened, the witchcraft changes significantly in terms of its geographical expansion and the fact that men are not only charged, men are accused, but they are arrested
Yeah.
for being witches. And by April 30th and early May, they've gone up to George Burroughs, who's up in Wells.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. Two contiguous towns, York and Wells, right?
Yeah.
One minister dies from the Indian attack. The other minister will die in August of 1692 as an accused and condemned witch. People need to think about that fact.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
two ministers of the contiguous towns have the same fate of dying in 1692,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, sure.
So you can see, the thing is you hold all this information in your mind and you're constantly looking for patterns. And the problem is that there's such a traditional way that's always being told
Yeah.
that you're always fighting against the traditional way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, I think that there's this is what happens in colonial New England, 17th century New England. There's all kinds of accusations of people being witches, but rarely is there any legal process because the magistrates say, hey, look, we're not interested. We're not interested. They dismiss the case and nothing happens.
Yeah.
What happens in 1692 is that the magistrates legitimize these accusations.
Yeah.
And they say there really are witches. And the thing is, you see, it's not just a few witches. It's this huge network of witches that they're envisioning. So they're all over the place.
But is the epicenter Salem, the accused, or is it in the outliers?
Well, what happens is you have roughly 10 afflicted girls
In Salem.
in Salem Village.
They're making the accusations about
And
like
it's
pearls?
really important to distinguish Salem Village from Salem Town.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Salem Village is known as Salem Farms. What happened over the course of the 17th century, individuals moved to these areas outside Salem town.
Yeah.
Boyer and Nissenbaum point out that Salem town is a seaport
Yeah.
with worldly values and commercialism and so forth.
Yeah.
Salem Village is an agricultural, it has a very different value system. That's their argument.
Yeah.
And that the independence move by Salem villagers is against that commercial, worldly lifestyle. So that what their point is that there's a Putnam family in Salem Village,
Yeah.
and then there's a Porter family.
Okay.
The Putnams are moving towards independence from Salem town, and the Porters are basically opposing the move. And then comes Paris ministry. Paris's ministry is formally organized in 1689. He's basically with those individuals who are seeking that independence.
Yeah.
And these Porters and their allies are doing everything to kill his meeting, his church,
Yeah.
in terms of just not providing tax money to support it, right?
Right.
So to them, the crisis is during the winter of 1691, 1692, because of what has happened with the meeting house.
Yeah.
So the Boyer Nissenbaum see the girls in the parsonage and say, the girls are suffering because the meeting house is being deprived of its tax money because of these individuals who are seeking to have Salem Village remain with Salem town.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's their explanation.
Wow.
And when I looked at it, I said, where's the trigger?
Yeah.
There's no trigger.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to have, for the traumatic events of what's going on in the witch trials, you need a trigger.
But this sufficed the magistrates.
What's that?
This appeased the magistrates, and they felt like, okay, we'll go ahead with the trials.
So Corwin and Haythorne examine these individuals who've been accused, and they make the critical decision to regard them to be accepted as witches, and then they're basically imprisoned. And that critical action to approve those accusations and to give them legitimacy is a turning point. Because at that early point, if they'd said, get out of here, there would have been no witchcraft outbreak. Right?
Yeah.
So you have to, you see, you have to look at all parts of the witchcraft outbreak. That's what people do not do. And Boyer and Nissenbaum don't do it either. You have to look at the judges. You have to look at the legal process. You have to look at the accusers, the afflicted accusers, the non-afflicted accusers. And you have to look at the witches. You have to identify each group and the motivation of each group. And if you do that, then you have an explanation. And if I could do that, it's taken me 46 years to do it, but I have done it.
So the trauma felt by the girls from Maine is different than it was interpreted in Salem. So what you're saying is that the trauma from the Indian raids and stuff wasn't really acknowledged in the trials and in Salem by the judges.
The thing is, first of all, I think there's such a overlay of traditional witch belief upon this. You have to really carefully look at the evidence in terms of finding the subtleties and the nuances to derive something significant. I got very excited. I was up at the Essex Institute looking at the WPA. So that back in the Depression period, the WPA members who were basically given this opportunity took the old records from the Salem trials and they put them into transcribed form. I was looking at these WPA transcripts, and then I found Martha Toothaker. Fear of the Indians made me a witch. I couldn't believe it. She lived in Billerica. She would die actually in Indian raid. Her fate would have it that she died in Indian raid. Fear of the Indians made me do it. One of the biggest, really exciting discoveries that I was to make was that. Because you see, and I point this out in the article, in the 17th century, Indians were not seen as distant from witches at all. Indian religion was basically seen as witchcraft. So Indians, that side of it, that Indians were seen so close to witches, was already there, right? And the very fact that an Indian, Tituba Indian, is the very first of the accused witches. I mean, so a slave from the West Indies, Paris had come from Barbados. A slave from the West Indies was in the parsonage. And the first Indian, or the first among the first, and probably one of the most important of the witches, because of the confession she gave, that gave this whole sense of this huge network, was an Indian who was accused of being a witch. Tituba Indian.
Yeah.
She's portrayed sometimes in some sources as being Negro, but she's an Indian, right? Tituba Indian.
Yeah.
John Indian is, also associated with Tituba. John Indian. So the witchcraft begins with them accusing an Indian of being a witch.
Wow, yeah. How do we address your frustration with not getting recognition for what you've
I can't even, it's hard to imagine. So I'm
Wait,
going
all right, so we're going back on camera.
Right, okay. So I'm going to show you the first book that ever cited my article, because it's Carol Carlson.
Okay.
Just a few years after the article was published.
Yeah.
I saw it and I said, wow, my article's finally being looked at by scholars and treated. Right?
Yes,
And I assumed that was going to be the starting point.
I would assume so.
Right?
Yeah.
But suddenly, after that, nothing. I mean, there's a kind of silence.
Yeah, but people read it, and then you feel like people
Oh,
used it.
they were so cautious of citing it.
Yeah.
Like they were almost embarrassed to cite the article. That really got me angry.
Yeah. So now you feel like it's just common knowledge that. So, but let's go back to what we talked about before we started filming, and that was Jung's active imagination, and how that you as a historian start to fill in the blanks using psychology.
Okay, all right. I was thinking about this morning. I took a class at UMass in the fall semester of 1976 on Lizzie Borden, of all things. It was a New Approaches to History class, and the class was the Lizzie Borden murders.
Yeah.
What induced Lizzie Borden to murder her parents, or stepmother and father? Perfect setting for me to think about this.
Yeah.
Because over the course of that semester, what was going on in her mind, right?
Yeah.
So I got to the end of the semester and I had to write a term paper. Now I had to come up with an organizational strategy for writing the term paper. I've been thinking, well, how could I write this paper? So what it is, I set it up as a set of conflicts, what I call the universal conflict, the immediate conflict, and the internal conflict. The internal conflict was going on in her mind, the immediate conflict was going around her, and the universal conflict was in her culture. If I use that same principle, and I think that almost intuitively I use that principle when I started thinking about York attack. I was thinking, I have to explain what's going on in the girls' minds, what's going on in their outer society, and what's going on in their culture to have this explanation work.
By using your own mind.
By using my own mind.
Yes, yeah.
One of the great moments for me. See, Boyd and Nissenbaum talk about the Ipswich Road. They say the Ipswich Road is critical to understanding this commercialism of Salem town versus the agricultural background of Salem Village. They see the Ipswich Road, because of all the commercial establishments on it, as threatening Salem Village.
Wow.
One moment, I was thinking, it was down that Ipswich Road from Maine that the dispatch rider came with the news of the York attack.
Yeah.
That's a visualization I had.
Yeah.
And it was a real one.
Yeah.
It had to be real because the news was brought to Boston. A rider came right through Salem Village and brought the news of the York attack.
Yeah.
And once you get that kind of image in your mind, it makes it a lot easier because he's riding through, and he is riding through. He had to be riding through.
Yeah.
So once you get that kind of visualization in your mind, so before that rider came, things were very different. Salem Village was in crisis, but the rider came down, and then Salem Village was moving into the serious problem that it was facing.
It was like electrified.
Like it was electrified.
Yeah.
You see, and you have to visualize it because
Yeah.
what evidence do you have that's true?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But visualization. I was constantly applying these visualizations to try to imagine what was happening in 1692.
Yeah.
I had to.
Yeah. So you think your article sort of laid the groundwork for people to take your idea for granted?
What seems to have happened is this. Okay. Before the article was published, people did not think that a war, like an Indian war, had the direct impact
Yeah.
upon the local society.
Yeah.
That's the turning point
Yeah.
in what I brought into people's minds.
Yeah.
That the people like Boris Nissenbaum, others, could say, well, there's a war going on, but we don't have to pay any attention to it. What's going on in Salem Village is far more important. They could have at least mentioned that there was a war going on, right?
Exactly.
No war,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I was pointing out, well, there are men who are dying.
Yeah.
I mean, look at these afflicted girls. They're teenagers, marriageable age. They're seeing men die in the war. They could be husbands. They're losing the possibility of getting married because of the war. They're seeing all the devastation of the war. They're seeing the economy impacted by the war. I mean, this is what I've discovered in the years since. Okay, Salem Village talks about this independence move. If they'd recognized it, the war would have been the thing that aggravated the independence move, because by distancing themselves from Salem town, they'd eliminate the problem of heavy taxes that the war taxes are creating. Salem has a fortification. Salem has a seaport. The war taxes are enormous on Salem town.
Yeah.
If they distance themselves from Salem town, they were eliminating the tax problem.
Yeah.
The meeting house, for example. The priorities in the wartime are, we need taxes for this. The meeting house is secondary. You cut down the taxes on the meeting house because the war is going on.
Yeah.
So Salem town and Salem Village are having this conflict because of the war.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Salem town, listen, these seaport towns like Salem are producing most of the soldiers during King Philip's War. If you go to the expeditions like the Mount Hope expedition, or these expeditions like the Narragansett expedition, they're drawing men from these seaport towns because they're available men.
Right.
They're not from the towns.
Yeah.
They can't afford to take it from the towns. They're taking it from the seaport towns.
Yeah.
So you look at the Narragansett campaign, multiple soldiers from the Salem Village area are killed at that time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I pointed out in the 1984 article, I called it, well, look, here, let's show you. This is one of the, I think one of the most, and even Danny says it's one of the most imaginative ideas in the article. This thing, I thought this morning, and this would be the best way to conclude this. I have not felt really part of that community until I let them know where I was coming from.
Yeah.
And the more that I felt that they knew where I was coming from, the more I felt I could be honest with them in ways I hadn't been before. Right?
And that's why your whole career has transpired.
Right.
As you've revealed yourself,
Right.
you find that you're well accepted.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right. And so I don't care if they don't agree. I don't care at all. I mean, if someone says, I think that's the silliest thing I've ever heard, okay, I don't care. Right? It's not going to kill me, right?
But nobody's going to say that.
Well, no, but I mean,
Right.
I think that...
All right, we're out of here. Bye.
I don't want to...
Thanks for joining us.
I don't want to constantly have people call me a treasure, right?
A treasurer?
A treasure.
Oh, okay.
They call me a treasure of this town. Fine. I'm a treasure of this town.
Yeah.
I don't want that simple statement, because it implies that, we looked at it and wow, but it didn't move us beyond recognizing, oh, look what you've done now. I want people to really read into it. That's why I wrote it that way.
Yeah, and all of the stuff that you've conveyed to me makes me have to reflect on a lot of stuff to be able to get to the essence of what you're thinking. And then for me to, I have to adapt this into my own head. It's not like just because you tell me something, it's like, oh yeah, that's black and white and James is right about everything he says. Because I came to the table with my own thought process, which was small and minute in comparison to all the investment that you've made.
Right.
Then when you share this with me, then I have to reprocess what I was thinking, and then I have to go, okay, well, then I'm going to adapt what James is saying, and that's a lot of information.
Well, would it help at this point if you read a narrative of the witchcraft?
No, right now I feel like I should write one. I think but I would give you credit. Because
if you read a narrative of the witchcraft and said, James, this author says this, and you say this.
No.
No?
No.
Oh.
I feel like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing amount of history that you have enlightened me with. So thank you very much.
Well, I think in your editing, you can come to the basic argument, right?
Okay.
You can come to the basic argument, and keep it at that. You know.
Oh yeah. I plan to, but I have enough material here for 2 or 3 other videos. So.
Well, maybe so.
Yeah. So
right?
good. Thank you.
But
Thank
I
you.
mean, I think you can keep it the basic argument.
Yes,
you know?
I understand. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm going to make that my objective. Yes.
And as I said, really avoid the use of conspiracy.
Yeah.
Because I think it gives.
Well, I'm going to think about that a little bit, and I'll come back to you on that. But for public purposes,
men who are severely pressured to take actions that they're very uncomfortable about.
yeah. Well, okay. Well, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And Samuel Sewall, you know, at a certain point, he speaks up in the meeting house later on, and he says, you know, I'm deeply regretful of what happened in 1692.
Wow.
He makes this sort of personal confession about what happened.
Yeah.
You have to think about that when you talk about conspiracy. These individuals are really regretful of what they
but
had
in
to do.
hindsight, they might be, but that doesn't mean they weren't accountable for their actions. Just say thanks again, James.